Welcome to Tartarian Tales number 48, and this one is going to be about the mathematics machines of the Tartarian Chinese, or I don't know what to really call this one, but it is very interesting, and I've got a great collection of art to go with it. It is from the book called The Present Condition of the Muscovite Empire till the year I-699 in two letters, the first from a gentleman who was conversant with the Muscovite ambassador in Holland, the second from a person of quality at Vienna concerning the late Muscovite embassy, his present Tsarish Majesty, the Russian Empire, and the Great Tartary, with the life of the present Emperor of China. I do believe it is from the perspective of a Jesuit, so it has survived, and it is here right now in the archives, and it is pretty interesting from that perspective. You never know what you're going to get. They are honest most of the time, and even though their perspective is a little warped, but isn't everybody's? So I guess we'll deal with it. I think you all will like this section, though. It has a lot of cool different aspects of life and kind of in the travels and the emperor and the China. I'm not sure how much is synonymous with Tartary and what was connected and what was happening at this time. Who knows? I included a collection of arts relating to the celestials and mathematical machines and math formulas and postulates and algorithms and geometries and Euclid and all kinds of different great artworks. So definitely check it out because I think it deals with that and the mathematical instruments being traded at the time, and who knows how ancient their origin was and who was taking what from who and how long these have been around, where people first discovered that they could create little machines to mimic the celestials above, and excellent stuff. Here we go. Tartarian Tales 48. I'm going to start halfway down on page 57, where it says, immediately after our first arrival at Peking, we presented him with two excellent machines, in which one might observe the eclipses of the sun and moon with the different aspects of the planets, for every day in the year and for many ages together. We stand indebted for the invention of these two most curious machines to those of the Academy Royal, the Emperor having commanded us to show him the perfect use of them and how to apply them to the Chinese calendar, ordered these two machines to be placed on each side of his throne in one of the principal apartments of his palace, where I saw them standing but the day before my departure out of Peking. A most convincing proof of the great esteem the Emperor has for these as well as all other curious and useful mathematical instruments. Ever since that time he has shown a most particular inclination and esteem both for the French mathematical instruments and other works and curious contrivances, those we had the honor to offer to his Majesty, having had the good fortune to meet with his approbation above all the rest. It was no wonder if the esteem the Emperor had for the European mathematical instruments soon influenced most of the great men at court to tread in his footsteps, and if those who honor us with their good will and favors do often engage us, to let some be brought over for them, being sensible that they cannot make their court with better hopes of success than by making a present of some curious mathematical invention or other to the Emperor, who not only receives very favorably all what is offered him in this kind, but shows so much eagerness for his being furnished with them from all parts, that he has caused all the mathematical instruments that were in the hands of the governors of the maritime provinces to be brought to Peking. To encourage this noble desire, we send to our brothers, the fathers, Fontenay-le-Comte and Vistelu, to desire them to furnish us with such instruments as we judged most proper for the Emperor's use. These fathers sent us several of the most curious mathematical instruments, some phosphorus, both solid and liquid, and other such like rarities, which we, having made a present of to the Emperor, he received them with all the marks of joy and a most particular esteem. But these fathers, being afterwards invited by the Emperor to his court, they, in their presence, met equally with the most obliging reception in the world. Among several other mathematical instruments they presented to his Majesty, there were several levels with two pendulums, to distinguish the seconds, for celestial observations, which by reason of their great exactness and usefulness, being highly extolled by the Emperor, he assigned them convenient places in his own bedchamber. And the prince, who is declared successor of the empire, and shows no less inclination for these curiosities than his royal father, Being extremely taken with them, and discovering his intention to us, I went straightways to our house, and pretended him with the only of the same kind I had left, which he accepted of in a most extraordinary obliging manner. After we had completed our explications both of the practical and speculative geometry in the same method as we had made use of before, when we instructed the emperor in the elements of the Euclid, he showed so much satisfaction in having attained to this noble science, that to give the world some manifest proofs of his esteem for these works we had composed, he ordered them to be translated out of the Tartarian into the Chinese language. He himself took the pains to prefix a preface to each of them, and to have them revised and printed in his own palace, and to have them published throughout the whole empire in both languages, as a most evident sign of his laudable intention to introduce the European sciences into China, and to render them familiar to all his subjects, and having observed in his third son, who was a young prince of 17 years of age, and endowed with many noble qualifications, a more than ordinary genius for these sciences, he taught him the principles of geometry in person. So does Euclid and these geometries come from Tartaria? That's an interesting claim, because these fathers don't seem to have been the creators of it. They seem to have been learned or stolen it. So we'll continue. I do not question, but there are not a few who will look upon this so extraordinary inclinations and assiduity towards these sciences, which, without all contradiction, are not sufficiently to be praised in a private person, as rather blamable than commendable in so great a prince, who bears the weight of so vast an empire as that of China upon his shoulders. But if we will take the pains to make due reflections upon the due character and present state of the Chinese empire and nation, who at all times have made learning the foundation stone of their government, and the knowledge of sciences the steps by which to ascend to the highest dignities and employments, we shall be forced to confess that the emperor's extraordinary passion for and delight in these sciences ought to be considered as the effects of a most refined piece of policy of France, who has an absolute insight into the true nature of the art of government. It is undeniable that of late years, if you accept moral philosophy, which is the principal study that meets with encouragement among the modern Chinese, this nation has neglected most of these sciences, which rendered their ancestors famous to posterity, and were questionless the chief cause of the flourishing condition of their empire. The present emperor, being inspired with a most glorious ambition to restore the ancient glory of this empire, he judged nothing could be more conducing to attain this great end, than if he could receive these most useful arts and sciences, which were once the glory of this nation, and by his own example encourage his subjects to follow his footsteps. The emperor, being thus instructed in all the parts of geometry, applied his thoughts to the study of philosophy, for which reason he commanded us to compile a body of philosophy in the Tartarian language, and to follow the same method we had observed in our mathematical treatises, which appeared to him the most easy and natural. And it almost looks like that says Tartarian. That's weird. You have to take a look at that text. They reverse two of the letters and upside down them. Kind of a weird evidence of tampering. And check it out. It's on page 62. The success wherewith it had pleased God hitherto to bless our endeavors increased our wishes and hopes of the same, if not better success in this, and as we were fully persuaded that this might prove one day the most proper means, and be consequently of the utmost consequence to dispose the hearts of the Chinese, especially those who have any relish of learning, towards the receiving of the gospel, we were not sparing in anything which we thought might contribute towards the introducing a good philosophy among them. For this purpose we consulted most of the ancient and modern philosophies, but among all of them found none more suitable for our purpose than the ancient and modern philosophies of Mr. Duhamel, a member of the Royal Academy, by reason of the solidity, purity, and good connection of the doctrine contained in this treatise, which therefore we made our guide to bring our work to the desired effect. But the emperor being about the same time attacked by a most dangerous distemper, it was the advice of his whole court, and especially of his physicians, upon his recovery, to desist for some time from his studies, as being prejudicial to the re-establishment of his health. This prince, being for the above-mentioned reason obliged to be more remiss in his applications to these sciences, we only showed him a short logic, which we intended as an introduction to our philosophical work, of which we had given a scheme in a large preface. It was upon this score that in lieu of pursuing the same method and purpose we intended before, we saw ourselves under an indispensable obligation to conform ourselves to the present disposition and particular inclinations of the emperor, which, as we had observed, being of late, for the most part, bent upon the knowledge of the structure of the human body, upon its various operations and most surprising motions, we, contrary to our former design, applied ourselves to treat of this with the utmost care and application. But because the Chinese, for all their great reputation of having for many years past had the best physicians, have at present but a very confused knowledge in anatomy, we were forced to extend this treatise to a much larger bulk than we are at first intended, and to give a true idea first of all the parts of the humane body in general, and to treat of each afterwards in particular, and to represent the several relations and connections betwixt them, to give them a right idea of the whole oeconomia animalis. We did not neglect to insert in this treatise all the most curious and useful discoveries of our modern anatomists, especially those of Mr. Duverney, and of some other learned members of the Royal Academy who have distinguished themselves before others in this, as well as in all other kind of learning. We showed the Emperor 12 of 14 of these propositions, with their proper figures and explications, just as he was returned out from one of his progresses he frequently makes into Tartary. He was so extremely pleased with them that, to show how much he was delighted with them, he ordered his chief painter, who was a great master of his art, to lay aside all other things, and to make it his whole business to draw these figures with all the exactness he could. Nevertheless, as this work required more application and assiduity than was consistent with the Emperor's health, so our labor was interrupted for some time by the Emperor's command, whole curiosity inclining rather at that time to the investigating the causes of some of the most noted distempers, wherewith he had either been formerly or was still afflicted. He ordered us to endeavor to inform him concerning the causes of these distempers, according to the principles of our modern European physicians. God Almighty, who is by his providence, had given us this favorable opportunity to touch more effectually the heart of the great prince in favor of the Christian religion and its ministers, did also assist us in making a considerable progress in this matter. For in 2 or 3 months' time we writ 18 or 20 small treatises, each treating of a certain distemper in particular, pursuant to the method prescribed to us by the Emperor. They met with the good fortune of being not only approved, but also very pleasing to the Emperor, who extolled them in public, and sent for us into his presence, to be witnesses ourselves of the satisfaction he showed upon this occasion. To give us an ample proof of his acknowledgment, he pitched upon the most proper recompense that could be bestowed upon ministers of the gospel, and at our most earnest request he, by his public edict, granted the free exercise of our religion, and consequently freed its professors from those dangers that had threatened them for many years last past. In some of the first of these treatises we had, upon the occasion of speaking of the internal chemical remedies, enlarged ourselves upon their excellencies in respect of this particular, that besides their qualities of curing or giving ease in many distempers, they had this peculiar prerogative before other medicines, that they were not so nauseous and taken in less quantity. The Emperor, having conceived a particular curiosity to see some effects of it, was very desirous to see some experiments made of this kind. We did all what in us lay to decline this province, in representing to him that we, having no experience in matters of this nature, durst not attempt a thing of such moment. But this prince, who by some small things of this nature he had seen us do before, judged that we might undertake this also with the same hopes of success, would not admit of our excuses. To work, therefore, we went, taking for our guide the dispensatory of the Sieur Charas, director of the Royal Laboratory. The Emperor assigned us a large room within the palace, where we set up a laboratory. Here you might have seen several sorts of furnaces, with most instruments and utensils requisite for chemical operations, which, pursuant to the Emperor's orders, who is never sparing upon such like occasions, were all of silver. We were busy in preparing several sorts of conserves, lymphs, and essences, for 3 months together, and the emperor would sometimes honor us with his presence, and took such particular satisfaction in those preparations that he ordered them to be preserved for his own use. More than this, he caused many golden and silver vessels to be made, in which he carried these medicines in his progresses, which he took a peculiar fancy in, and would give them upon occasion to his children, the great men of his court, and others of his attendants. It must truly be confessed of this prince that his natural inclinations are very charitable, for no sooner does he hear any of his servants being ill, but he sends his physicians to them, and liberally furnishes them with what is most precious among his medicines. Of this we have had several times experiences ourselves, as often as any of us have happened to be afflicted with any distemper. We had the good fortune to see many sick people, and among them several of the emperor's household, to be relieved by these medicines we had brought along with us out of Europe. The emperor falling sick some time after, and having for some time made use of the Chinese remedies, but with little success, had recourse to ours, which produced the desired effect. His physicians, jealous of their reputation, did all what in them lay to restore him to his health, but to little purpose, all proving ineffectual, except the quinquina, of which the two fathers, de Fontenay and Visdalou, who arrived very fortunately at that time, had brought a good quantity along with them. Heaven, which upon this, as well as several other occasions, was pleased to give us a particular mark of its mercy, being willing to make use of our assistance as a recompense to this prince, for the liberty granted to the professors of the Christian religion in the preceding year, and as a further engagement to extend his bounty more and more towards the preachers of the gospel, to whom he stood indebted for the preservation of his life, as he himself was pleased publicly to declare in the presence of most of the grandees of his court. There are very few who have tarried for any considerable time at Peking, but what know with how much esteem and affection Father Verbiest was received by this emperor. But it is also undeniable that he never gave him such particular proofs of his esteem as he did to us for several years past, whilst we had the honor of being instrumental in promoting his studies in the mathematics. Those who are acquainted with the Chinese court, where everything is carried on with a singular grandeur, are not ignorant how rare a thing it is to see their emperors enter into a familiar conversation with their subjects, and how difficult a thing it is, even for the greatest men in the empire and the princes of the royal blood, to approach his person, unless it be upon the occasion of some public festival, will perhaps be scarce able to believe that we had so free an admittance, especially considering that we were religious persons and foreigners. Love that. So there's a decent amount packed in there, and again, you never know if they have already gotten to this and switched some of the words out according to the fact that some of these are in italics, some of the words that are key, like the Tartarian and Chinese words, so you never know. But if you take it from face value, it's interesting to have the works of Euclid translated from the native Tartarian into the Chinese language for this emperor, who was collecting all kinds of knowledge, even though his ancient ancestors had once obtained all this knowledge. So it's really bizarre how these resets have happened and why they happen all over the world in multiple places at various times, and who is the dominant civilization that constantly is the ones resetting and the ones who regain control and retain control after every single one of these, or who command it. The people like the World Economic Forum in our present day are challenging the freedom-loving people all over the world, and hopefully they're going to get pummeled. But a lot of times it seems like it didn't happen in the past. It seems like the bad people won, and they crushed different things, and they stole inventions, discoveries, creations, everything from pasts, and repurposed them as their own. I wonder if that actually helps us lose some of the value, and maybe why we're so powerfully blown away when we see amazing works of art in incredible museums is because of something much deeper. And maybe if we actually had the proper names attributed to them, we'd be actually maybe even gaining from their interdimensional blessings, because we would be knowing the truth instead of having them, if there are all these metaphysical realms, watching down at us being like, damn it, why is Da Vinci and all these other people taking credit for my works when they're actually just frauds and different creators and Freemasons gathering all kinds of creations and claiming them as their own and falsely. So who knows? I have no idea, but it's just interesting to see all the different possibilities out there and all the different time periods and just the perspective shift. Whoever writes the perspective, whoever writes the book, whoever writes the history gets to declare the knowledge, and whether they're cutting and pasting hundreds of years later or not, they've been pretty much doing that forever, and it's going to probably keep happening until we can get to the bottom of all of this. Someone actually in the text, in one of the comments, told me that said that they had heard that the Smithsonian and other people were dumping things into the Mariana Trench. So we have a long haul ahead of us, things that have been burned, things that have been destroyed, things that have been dumped in oceanic trenches to get rid of them and completely lose their historical perspective of these treasures, which we need to see to grasp our full potential again and our full just power as humans. Let's just keep digging. Every little bit helps. Bless you all.